EC, after repeating suggestion in an undertone. Yes, we have the records here of a very unusual personality being also an Atlantean. This experience may make or break the entity in its search for that which is to answer those spiritual interpretations or the carnal forces in the experience of the entity through the earthly sojourn. 2. Then, as indicated, we have those unusual experiences in the earth by the entity and the definitive urges which are at variance to the general activities in sex relationships. For in the experience in the Atlantean land, the entity sought to be both and wasn't very successful at either. 3. In giving the interpretations, then, of the records we find with this entity, these are urges latent and manifest. 4. Music should be the career, should be the purpose of the entity in its activity, but should be accomplished by its own efforts within itself for the very love of music itself, and should be only of the classic and operatic nature. 5. For the entity was a student under Saint Cecilia, who attained to the realm close to infinity, or able to interpret the music of the spheres, and yet failing in some respect, for the entity became enamored of the saint, and you can guess what happened. 6. In the application then of self, there must be the attaining of that spiritual awakening such that the influences, relationships, activities are not other than save that of searching for an answer to the voices of the night, the rhapsodies of the moon upon the water, and the voice of the sunrise. These and similar actions in nature itself, which take the entity out of the realm of physical emotions, should be stressed, so that only the mental and spiritual emotions take their place. 7. The entity should, then, work towards making or engaging in a year's service or work, save every penny, spend every penny only for music and lessons, but make of and for itself the physical hardships. Sleep on a hard bed, don't eat too much, don't indulge in things such as sweets or add to the body, nor engage in those activities in which the movies, such as are shown today, are a part of the activity. Refrain from the same. Oft go for days only on bread and water, but do it of thyself if ye would succeed, and ye may become even greater pianists than Hoffmann, or Hauptmann, or Hoffmann Joseph Casimir. As to the activities in the earth, as has been indicated, these are far and wide, and yet give and show the pattern of this unusual entity, but with an opportunity in the present experience to outshine materiality, as well as spirituality. Many an individual, yet most of all finding its relationship, its true relationship to the infinite. 9. As in the experience before this, in the name then Giovanna Bactio, the entity sought the activities in its music with the saint. As the activities progressed, the music was forgotten in the desire physically for the saint, and it eventually destroyed itself. 10. Before that, we find the entity was in the activity in the Temple of Solomon, Jerusalem, when there was in the choosing by David of those who were to be prepared for the service of music in the temple, which was built or yet to be built. David chose young men and they were given the physical as well as the mental and spiritual training through the activities in the preparation in the school, as had been undertaken or begun by Elijah and Carmel. 11. Thus the entity in the name Apsa was among those who were in the temple service when the activities were begun through those periods of Solomon's reign. Those were the periods when there was a great amount of what today would be called notoriety, or during those periods when the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon, the entity was chosen as one to make music for Solomon to make love by to the Queen. 12. The entity was lacking in some material as well as spiritual undertakings, and yet these are those influences which are to be part of the entity's experience. 12. Do not, then, make an early choice of companionship, for this would not be thy undoing. Do not wed before the 32nd year of age. Do not wed, then, until at least ye have conquered thyself in the full training of the body, the hand, the mind in thy music. Use the piano alone. 14. Before that, we find the entity was in the Atlantean land, and in those periods before Adam was in the earth, the entity was among those who were then, quote-unquote, thought projections. And the physical being had the union of sex in the one body, and yet a real musician on the pipes or reed instruments. 15. As to the abilities of the entity, then, that to which may attain and how. There is nothing impossible for the entity to attain in fame or fortune or in its spiritual unfoldment, and yet these will not be easy until the entity has conquered self. Ready for questions. Question 1. Should I take the position or start school in June? Answer. If that is desire, whatever may be the choice, do start, work for same, and don't let anyone give you anything. Question 2. Where and with whom should I study piano after graduating? Answer 2. With some piano school in New York, but when you go to New York, beware. Question 3. Am I a homosexual? Answer 3. Read what has been given. Question 4. Any further mental and spiritual advice? Answer 4. Decide in self which you will choose, for there is here set before thee good and evil, life and death. Choose thou and know ever within self. If ye are one in and with the Lord in His purpose, naught can be against thee. We are through. Jones's letter to Apsa. Quote, I couldn't begin to tell you how overjoyed we all were to get your reading, not only because it held such wonderful promises, but because it seems that to be what you need to get a hold of yourself. What it says about music being your career was said slowly and empathetically, as was most of the reading. Study over and over again the paragraph beginning, in the application then of self. It was so beautifully given that it brought tears to our eyes. A phrase that was said most meaningfully was, quote, yet most of all, finding its true relationship to the infinite, end quote. This last answer, A5, was at the very first stern, and then like a benediction. We were all so moved that at first we didn't know what to say, and then everybody started talking at once. Even Mr. Cayce, in his sleepy state, got interested. Do write and tell us what you are going to do. We are not interested in whether you liked the reading, although Mr. Cayce would like to hear that. The rest of us want to know what you are going to do about it. Write soon. End of quote. Report. An excerpt from Mrs. Smith's letter. Quote, he is practicing seriously and finally with a purpose, I think. The reading was really what he needed, though no one can ever be sure it will last. End of quote. Excerpt letter from Apsva. Quote, the reading has been a decided comfort, for I didn't know whether or not to go into music. But it seems to me the reading gets one or two things mixed up. For example, I'm supposed to work my way and accept nothing from anybody, and of course, walk the straight and narrow morally. And then that lovely paragraph concerning my interpreting the voices of the night. As I see it now, those two are mutually exclusive. Also, I believe that art and sex are closely related, and to completely repress the latter, as I am supposed to do, plays havoc on the former. End quote. Quote, enclosed is a money order. Would you please send me the book, A Search for God? Also, please tell me how to obtain a copy of my reading which Mr. Cayce gave around May 1944. The original was lost after my mother died and the house was broken up. Thank you. End of quote. Replied, quote, the book is being mailed to you under separate cover, and enclosed you will find a copy of your reading. End of quote. No reply. Excerpt from, quote, the ... Daily Statesman, a review, end of quote. Mezzo-soprano, American-born and trained star of opera and concert stage, opened. New recital season. A word for Apsva at the piano. Here was a young, accomplished and pianist whose assistance to the art was both brilliant and positive. He stole no scenes, but one will always remember that he was there. His Rachmaninoff preludes and his encore, Clair de Lune, was markedly excellent. End of quote. Mr. Letter to Jones. Quote, we had a musical with some women in the evening, and afterwards, Apsva played the piano. Much talent and very good. He was on TV yesterday. Since we are all dealing with life and no fiction, we can never be assured of the quote-unquote ever after, which remains fixed. The last letter from Apsva was not very promising, but because there is no greater power than its that will, any time Apsva has sufficient desire to discipline himself, his reward is sure.